The truck rattled to a stop in front of the worst house on the block. Rotting eaves, weeds chest high, windows gray with years of dust. A man stepped out, steady, silent. He pulled boxes from the truck bed one by one, jaw tight, eyes locked on the collapsed porch like he was seeing something no one else could. Behind him, a little girl climbed down, arms wrapped around a small wooden box, holding it the way most children hold a hand in the dark. Curtains shifted. Then came the whispers. "There goes the neighborhood." Someone laughed, short, sharp, without bothering to lower their voice. Did he even look at this place before he bought it? Or was this all he could afford? What none of them knew was that this man had worked 3 jobs for 3 straight years, not to find a better house, to find this exact one. Oakwood Estates had a certain kind of order that didn't happen by accident. Lawns were trimmed to the same length on the same day. Mailboxes matched. Flower beds ran in straight lines, color coordinated, seasonally rotated. The Homeowners Association newsletter arrived every first Monday of the month, and it was read. Every rule in it was read. Number 42. Sycamore Lane was the only thing in the neighborhood that hadn't gotten the memo for 15 years running. The Victorian house at the end of the block had once been the kind of place people slowed down to look at. 3 stories, wide wraparound porch, a garden that climbed the iron fence in summer. Somewhere along the way, it had simply been left. The family who owned it moved out. The property changed hands twice through lawyers and paperwork, and no one ever came to live in it. 15 years of rain, frost, and neglect had done the rest. The porch sagged in the middle like a spine that had given up. The paint had peeled back to bare gray wood. A climbing frame in the far corner of the garden had gone so deep into the ivy that you could only see its top rung. By the time Daniel Carter's truck pulled into the driveway, the house had become the kind of local legend that parents pointed at and children dared each other to touch. Daniel didn't seem to notice the legend. He carried boxes through the front door with the same focused quiet he brought to everything. Shoulders low, steps measured, face unreadable. He was 39, lean in the way that came from work rather than effort, with hands that were permanently calloused and a jaw that sat slightly tighter than it needed to. He fixed things for a living. Boilers, plumbing, structural cracks, failing staircases. He was the man people called when something had broken badly enough that they couldn't pretend it hadn't. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. Lily followed him up the porch steps, carrying nothing except the wooden box. She was 8 years old and small for it, with her mother's dark eyes and a way of watching the world that made adults instinctively lower their voices around her. The box was cedar, about the size of a hardcover book, worn smooth at the corners. She had carried it every day for the past 2 years, on the bus, to school, through every temporary apartment they had moved through since Sarah died. She didn't open it in front of people. She barely opened it at all. But she kept it against her body the way other children kept nightlights on, and Daniel had never once asked her to put it down. Inside number 42, the air smelled of dust and old timber, and something faintly sweet that Daniel couldn't identify, though he stood very still for a long moment trying. Lily watched him from the doorway. "Is it okay?" she asked. "It's going to be," he said. The neighbors watched the first week from behind glass. They saw Daniel haul tools from the truck before he even brought in furniture. They saw him disappear into the house at 7 in the morning and come out after dark, sawdust on his shirt, moving slow the way a man moves when his body is tired, but his mind won't stop. What they did not see was what he was actually doing. He wasn't fixing the porch. He wasn't painting the front face or repairing the fence line or doing any of the things that would have made number 42 acceptable by Oakwood standards. Instead, he spent the first 3 days on a single chair, a rocking chair tucked into the alcove beside the largest window, its joints swollen and split, one arm coming off entirely. He took it apart down to its individual pieces, laid them out on a canvas drop cloth, sanded each one by hand, and rebuilt it from the inside out. On the fourth day, he moved to the garden. The old climbing frame was buried under 15 years of ivy. He worked at it slowly, cutting the growth back layer by layer, not tearing, but unwinding, until the iron frame underneath came into the light clean and whole. He wasn't restoring a house, he was restoring something else, and the difference was visible if you knew what to look for. The neighbors didn't. On the sixth day, Daniel pulled up a section of loose floorboard in the back hallway to check the joists beneath. He found the tin box almost immediately. Small, rectangular, green with age, tucked into the gap between two beams exactly where he had left it. 22 years. He sat back on his heels and held it with both hands, and didn't move for a long time. Then he lifted the lid. Inside, a photograph, slightly curled at the edges. Two teenagers sitting on this same porch railing, Sarah laughing at something off to the left. A folded note in his own 17-year-old handwriting. The ink faded to a pale brown. And a small iron key that fit nothing either of them had ever been able to identify. He had tried every lock in the house in the days after he moved in, working through the doors and cabinets and old strong boxes one by one. Nothing. He set the key back in the tin and closed the lid. Some things didn't need to open anything. They just needed to exist. He set the tin box on the windowsill beside the restored rocking chair and went back to work. Elena Marsh lived directly across the street. She was in her mid-50s, recently retired from 20 years of teaching third grade. With reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose and a habit of bringing food to people who looked like they hadn't eaten. She had watched Daniel all week with a different kind of attention than the other neighbors. Not suspicious, just careful, the way she had once watched quiet children in the back row of her classroom. On the seventh day, she crossed the street with a thermos of tea and 2 cups. She didn't knock loudly. She didn't announce herself. She simply sat down on the bottom porch step and poured 2 cups and left one beside her on the wood. Lily appeared in the doorway about 10 minutes later. She took in Elena the way she took in everything, steadily, without hurry. Elena looked up. "You can sit with me if you want," she said. "I brought paper." She pulled a small sketch pad from her bag. "I'm not very good, but I like doing it." Lily came and sat 2 steps above her, the wooden box in her lap, and watched Elena draw badly and without apology. She didn't say anything. Neither did Elena. Daniel appeared once at the window, saw the 2 of them on the steps, and went back to what he was doing. That became the pattern of the following week. Elena came in the late afternoon, brought something: tea, a sandwich, once a small pot of marigolds she said needed more sun than her side of the street got. She and Lily sat together and drew or just watched the street without talking much. Elena never asked about the box. She never asked about Sarah. She asked Lily once what her favorite color was, and Lily said gray-blue, like the sky right before it rains, and Elena nodded, like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. On the 9th day, Lily opened the box. She lifted the lid slowly and tilted it so Elena could see inside. There was a photograph, creased at the center. A woman in a garden, laughing at someone off camera, her hair loose, one hand reaching towards something above her. There was a pressed flower, flattened and translucent with age, held between 2 squares of wax paper. And there was a silver bracelet, delicate, with a small heart-shaped disc at the clasp. "This was my mom's," Lily said. "She grew up in this garden." She touched the edge of the photograph without picking it up. "Dad wanted me to know what it looked like when she was happy here." Elena looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked up at the house, the sagging porch, the stripped paint, the garden still half reclaimed from the ivy. She was quiet in the way people are quiet when something that seemed like one thing has just become something else entirely. "Your dad," she said carefully, "loves you very much." Lily closed the box. She held it the way she always held it, tied against her ribs. But for the first time since they had moved in, her shoulders were not braced for something. The HOA notice arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the front door sometime before dawn, a single page, formally letterheaded, itemizing 11 separate violations. Peeling exterior paint, unsecured porch structure, overgrown lot, deteriorated fence line. The list went on. At the bottom, a deadline, 30 days to bring the property into compliance, or face a daily fine that started at $150 and escalated from there. Attached was a business card. Richard Hollis, HOA Board President. Richard didn't wait for a response. He arrived that same afternoon with 2 other board members flanking him, clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield, his polo shirt ironed to a crease. He was the kind of man who had never once doubted that the rules existed for everyone else's benefit. He stood at the base of the porch steps and called out before he even knocked. Daniel came to the door with sandpaper still in his hand. He looked at the 3 of them without expression. Richard introduced himself with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this before, then launched directly into it. "Mr. Carter, I'll be straightforward with you. This property is in violation of 14 community standards. I've added 3 more since the notice was printed. The residents of Oakwood have worked hard to maintain the value of this neighborhood, and what's happening here is a problem for all of us." He gestured broadly at the house. "If you don't have the resources to bring it up to standard, there are programs, other areas, that might be a better fit for your situation." Daniel looked at him for a moment. Then he turned back to the doorframe he had been sanding and drew the paper across the wood in one long, even stroke. "I'm not interested in your standards," he said. "I'm interested in the truth of this house." Richard's jaw tightened. He said something else, about timelines, about property values, about legal remedies available to the board. Daniel kept sanding. Eventually, Richard ran out of things to say, and the 3 of them left, footsteps clipped and precise down the front walk. From across the street, Elena watched from her front window. She had seen Richard's expression when he turned back toward the sidewalk, the slight collapse around his eyes that she recognized from years of dealing with people who had expected a fight and gotten something they didn't have a category for. She poured herself a second cup of tea and went back to her afternoon. The 30 days came and went. Richard filed the fine. Daniel paid it, on time, without comment, and went back to work on the interior. It was Clara Whitfield who changed everything, though she hadn't intended to change anything at all. Clara was 71, retired from 40 years as head librarian of the Oakwood Public Library, and she still went in 3 afternoons a week as a volunteer because she said the smell of the archive room was the only thing that reliably cleared her head. She had lived on Sycamore Lane for 4 decades. She had watched number 42 go dark and stay dark, and she had watched the new family move in with the same measured attention she brought to most things. She wasn't hostile. She wasn't warm. She was simply observational in the way of people who have spent a lifetime organizing information. She found the photograph by accident, pulling a box of old community newsletters from the back shelf of the archive to make room for a new filing cabinet. It had slipped between 2 issues from the early 2000s, a page torn from the County Gazette, slightly yellowed, a local science fair, 4 children pictured in front of their projects, ribbons around their necks. And in the center of the frame, a girl of about 11 or 12, dark-eyed and grinning, standing in front of a display about soil composition and plant growth. Behind her, just visible at the edge of the photograph, was a house, a Victorian house with a wide porch, a climbing frame in the far corner of the garden. Clara read the caption twice. Sarah Miller, age 12, first place, environmental science. She sat with the photograph for a long time. Then she went home and knocked on Elena's door. By the following morning, the information had moved through the neighborhood, the way information always moves through close quarters. Fast, slightly distorted, and impossible to stop. Someone had told someone who had mentioned it to someone else, and by the time Richard Hollis heard it, he had already received 2 separate phone calls and a text message with a photograph of the photograph. He stood on his own front porch and stared at his phone screen and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't immediately recognize. He called a neighborhood meeting. Informal, he said. Just to talk. It wasn't informal. 23 people gathered on the Hollis front lawn that Saturday afternoon, some with coffee cups, some with crossed arms, all of them with the particular energy of a crowd that has found a new shape for its unease. Howard Henderson, a heavy-set man in his 60s who lived 4 houses down, stood near the back with his hands in his pockets and said nothing, but watched number 42 with an expression that was harder to read than most. Richard stood at the front with his clipboard, though he wasn't writing anything down. He had planned to be controlled. He was not entirely controlled. When Daniel came out of the house and saw the gathering across the street, he stood on the porch for a moment with a level in his hand. Then he set the level down against the railing and walked across. The crowd opened for him. Richard said, "We know about Sarah Miller." His voice was even but tight at the edges. "We know she lived in that house. We know she was your wife." He looked at Daniel steadily. "What I don't understand is why you're doing this. Why bring your daughter here, to a house like that, in a state like that? What is the point of all this?" The group was very still. Daniel stood in the middle of the street. He looked at Richard, then at the crowd, then at the house behind him, the sagging porch, the stripped paint, the iron climbing frame now fully cleared and standing clean in the autumn light. At the edge of the gathering, almost at the back, Elena stood with her arms at her sides. She wasn't watching Daniel. She was watching Lily, who had come to stand in the doorway of number 42, wooden box in both arms, and was watching her father. Something moved across Daniel's face, not quite a decision, more like a door opening from the inside. He looked back at Richard. "You want to know why I bought that house?" It wasn't a question. He said it the way a man says something he has been carrying for a long time and has finally set down on a table. Then he told them. He told them about being 17 years old and spending his weekends in that house, helping Gerald Miller with repairs. He told them about Sarah, not the whole of her, because the whole of her couldn't fit into a parking lot on a Saturday afternoon, but enough. The October afternoon with the tin box and the floorboard, the promise that didn't have a name yet, the years that followed, the city, the small apartment, the wedding in her aunt's backyard, the way Sarah used to describe that house in the offhand way people describe places that are coded into them. The roses climbed all the way to the second window. My father built the climbing frame in one weekend. The kitchen always smelled like something. She had talked about it the way people talk about the place they are always returning to in their mind, even after 15 years away. Even at the end, when talking about anything took effort, she often didn't have. She died 26 months ago. Lily had been 6. "She's 8 now," Daniel said. "She's old enough to understand that her mother is gone, but not quite old enough to hold on to who her mother was. Memory at that age is thin. It slips." He looked at the house. Sarah grew up in that garden. She pressed flowers in that kitchen. She sat in that rocking chair at that window when she was sick and her father brought her soup. All of that is still there, inside those walls, if you know how to find it. He turned back to the crowd. "I'm not fixing up a house for you to look at. I'm rebuilding a place where my daughter can feel her mother. I'm drawing a map that will still exist when Lily is 30 and can't quite remember the sound of Sarah's voice. That's all this is. That's all it has ever been. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees at the edge of the lot. Richard Hollis had stopped looking at his clipboard. He was looking at the house, at the one section of the porch where the boards had been replaced, the new wood pale against the gray, precise and careful, exactly the right width. He thought about the 11 violations on his form. He thought about the daily fine. Then he thought about something his wife, Margaret, had said to him when he first started with the HOA years ago, when he had come home proud of an enforcement action, and she had looked at him with her head tilted slightly and said, "Richard, what exactly are we trying to protect?" He had thought he knew the answer then. He was less certain of it now. The crowd didn't erupt. There was no sudden wave of feeling, no moment of group catharsis. Instead, there was the particular silence that falls when 23 people are all having the same private reckoning at the same time. Some of them were thinking about the notices they had signed. Some were thinking about the way they had laughed, short and sharp and careless, from behind their curtains on the day the truck arrived. Some were thinking about the little girl in the doorway, holding her box with both hands, and what exactly she had heard just now, standing at the edge of it. Clara Whitfield stood near the back with her hands folded in front of her and looked at number 42 the way she had looked at the photograph in the archive, with the careful attention of someone sorting out what a thing actually meant. She had lived on this street for 40 years. She had watched that house go dark. She had not once, in all that time, thought to look up who had lived in it. Elena was the first person to move. She turned away from the group quietly, without announcement, and walked back across the street toward her own house. No one stopped her. No one said anything. But Richard watched her go, and something about the steadiness of her step, unhurried, certain, already decided, made him look down at the clipboard in his hands like he was seeing it clearly for the first time. He didn't know yet what he was going to do, but he knew that what he had been doing wasn't it. The neighborhood went quiet in a way it hadn't been before. Not the polished, performative quiet of Oakwood on a weekday morning, when everyone was simply elsewhere and the street held its usual order. This was a different kind of quiet, interior, weighted, the kind that settles over a place when people are still physically present, but have retreated somewhere inside themselves. Curtains were drawn. Cars sat in driveways past their usual departure times. The Saturday afternoon gathering had broken up without ceremony, people drifting back to their own houses in ones and twos, not speaking much, eyes down. Richard Hollis went home and sat at his kitchen table for a long time without turning on any lights. He thought about the 11 violations on his form. He thought about the phrase he had used, "Other areas might be a better fit for your situation," and how clean and reasonable it had sounded when he said it, and how it sounded now when he replayed it with the context of what he knew. He thought about the daily fine he had filed and the check Daniel had sent back within 48 hours, precise and unchallenging, which Richard had deposited without looking at the name on it too carefully. He thought about Margaret, who had been watching the house across the way with an expression he couldn't entirely read, and who had said nothing to him since the meeting broke up, except to put a hand briefly on his shoulder as she passed him in the hallway. He didn't sleep well. He suspected he was not alone in that. Across the street, the lights at number 42 stayed on past midnight. Daniel worked. That was what he did when the weight of things became unmanageable. He found something that needed fixing, and he fixed it. He was rehanging the kitchen door, which had warped in its frame over 15 years and no longer closed flush. Lily was asleep upstairs in the room Sarah had grown up in, the cedar box on the nightstand beside her, the window open a crack the way she liked it. Daniel could hear the trees moving in the dark outside. He thought about standing in the street that afternoon, with 23 people looking at him and saying all of it out loud. He had not planned to. He had walked over with no particular intention except to not be the kind of man who retreated. But once he started, the words had come the way things come when they have been held in too long. Not carefully, not in order, but true. He wasn't sure what it had changed. He wasn't sure it had changed anything. The kitchen door swung shut with a clean click. He tested it twice. Then he turned off the light and went upstairs. 3 days passed. The street did its usual things. Recycling bins out on Wednesday, sprinklers on Thursday morning, the mail carrier making his rounds at 11:30. Nobody came to number 42. Nobody waved across the yard. But the laughter from behind curtains had stopped. The pointed comments that had floated over fences in the first weeks had gone silent. Whatever was happening on Sycamore Lane, it had moved into a phase that didn't have a name yet. On the 4th morning, Elena came back. She didn't bring tea this time. She came with a canvas tote bag over each shoulder and a wooden crate under one arm, and inside the crate was a set of garden tools, so old their handles had been worn to a dark polish. A trowel, a hand fork, a pair of pruning shears with brass fittings. She set the crate down at the edge of the front garden without knocking on the door, pulled on a pair of work gloves, and started clearing the bed along the iron fence. Daniel came to the window and looked at her. She didn't look up. He went back to what he was doing. An hour later, Lily came and sat on the porch steps to watch. Elena handed her the hand fork and showed her how to loosen the soil around the base of the old rose canes without disturbing the roots. Lily worked carefully, the way she did everything, with the focused patience of someone twice her age. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The following morning, Howard Henderson appeared at the garden gate. He had stood near the back of the crowd at the meeting and said nothing, but he had heard everything. He was carrying a tin of high-grade wood oil by the handle, and he set it down at the base of the porch steps with a small grunt of effort and straightened up. "For the porch boards," he said. "The new ones will dry out if you don't treat them before winter." Daniel looked at him for a moment. "I know," he said. "I was going to get to it." Howard nodded. "I've got more if you need it." He set the tin down by the steps and walked back down the front path without waiting for a response. That was how it went. Not all at once, not with speeches or gestures or any organized declaration of changed hearts. It came one person at a time, like candles being lit in a large, dark room, each one small and insufficient on its own, but incrementally, the room began to change. A woman Daniel had never spoken to left a flat of winter pansies by the gate, with a handwritten note that said only for the front bed. A teenage boy appeared one Saturday and asked, with the particular awkward directness of someone who had been sent by a parent, but was trying to make it seem voluntary, if there was anything heavy that needed moving. Daniel put him to work carrying salvaged timber from the backyard to the side of the house, and the boy worked without complaint for 3 hours and accepted a glass of water and left. Clara Whitfield came on a Thursday afternoon. She brought the photograph, the original, which she had asked the archive to let her borrow, slipped carefully into a protective sleeve. She and Daniel stood on the porch and looked at it together. Sarah, at 12, standing in front of her science project, the house visible behind her, the climbing frame just at the edge of the frame. "I thought you should have it," Clara said. Or Lily. Daniel held the sleeve carefully with both hands. He looked at Sarah's face, the grin, the ribbon around her neck, her hand already reaching toward something out of frame. She had always been reaching toward something. "Thank you," he said. That was all. But Clara, who had spent 40 years listening to what people meant rather than what they said, understood that it was enough. Lily was in the garden when Clara left. She had been spending most of her afternoons out there since Elena had given her the hand fork, working through the beds methodically, learning the difference between a weed and a volunteer plant, asking questions when she had them, and otherwise being comfortably silent. That afternoon, as she was clearing around the base of the old climbing frame, she started to sing. Daniel heard it from inside, something soft and slightly tuneless, a song he half recognized from the radio, Lily's version of it, her own internal rhythm. He stood very still by the kitchen window and listened. He hadn't heard her sing since before Sarah died. Richard Hollis arrived on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the meeting. He came alone. No clipboard, no board members, no formal notice. He was carrying a 5-gallon paint can by the wire handle, and he set it down at the base of the porch steps with a small grunt of effort and straightened up. Daniel came out and looked at the can. The label had been marked in Richard's handwriting. Exterior, cream, matched to original, circa 1920s. I had it color-matched at the hardware store, Richard said. He wasn't entirely comfortable, and he wasn't pretending otherwise. I found an old photograph in the county historical records. The house, the original color. Before they repainted it in the 1970s, he cleared his throat. Margaret said it was the color of hope. I don't know if that's a paint color or not, but she said it. Daniel looked at the can. Then he looked at Richard. Richard said, "I'd like to help, if that's still possible." There was a long moment. A bird moved in the oak tree at the edge of the lot. From inside, the sound of Lily's footsteps crossed the upstairs hallway. "You know how to use a brush?" Daniel asked. "I painted my own house," Richard said. "Took me 3 weekends, but I did it." "Then you can start on the east wall," Daniel said. "The scraper's on the porch." They worked through the morning without talking much. Elena came at 11 and started on the porch trim. Howard Henderson appeared with his son-in-law and a second paint tray. The woman who had left the pansies, her name was Deborah, Daniel had since learned, brought sandwiches at noon and stayed to help. Clara came and worked slowly but steadily in the garden with Lily, the two of them kneeling side by side in the soil, talking about what Sarah's roses had looked like in the summer photographs from the historical archive, which varieties might be found again, what they would smell like in June. By late afternoon, the east wall of number 42 was the color of cream, pale and warm in the autumn light. It looked the way old things look when they are correctly restored. Not new, not falsified, but returned to themselves. Lily stood on the porch at the end of the day and looked at it. She had paint on her forearm from brushing against the wet wall without noticing, a pale stripe from wrist to elbow. She didn't wipe it off. "It's pretty," she said. "Your mom would have had an opinion about the exact shade," Daniel said. He was standing beside her. Both of them were looking at the wall. "She would have said it was a little too yellow," Lily said. Daniel looked at her. She was still looking at the wall, but she was smiling. A small, private smile, the kind that comes with a memory that belongs entirely to you. "Yeah," he said. She probably would have. The cedar box moved from Lily's nightstand to the mantelpiece above the fireplace in the front room about a week later. She did it herself, without announcement, setting it carefully in the center of the stone shelf, where the light from the window caught the grain of the wood. Beside it, she placed the photograph that Clara had brought, Sarah at 12, grinning, reaching, in a plain wooden frame that Daniel had made from a piece of salvaged oak. Then she stood back and looked at the arrangement for a moment, adjusted the frame a 1/4 inch to the left, and went to find her hand fork. Daniel stood in the doorway of the front room and looked at the mantelpiece for a long time after she was gone. The work on number 42 continued through the autumn and into the winter, slower now as the temperature dropped, but steady. The porch was fully resecured by November. The climbing frame was sanded and treated and repainted a deep forest green. The front garden had been replanted, pansies for the winter, and beneath the soil, dormant bulbs that would come up in the spring as tulips, and then, later, as roses. The old variety, sourced from a specialty nursery, 2 counties away that Clara had found in a catalog. Sometime in early December, a recruiting firm called Daniel about a position in Portland. Senior facilities manager for a hospital network. Salary nearly double what he made now. Full benefits, a moving allowance. He listened to the full pitch. He asked 2 or 3 reasonable questions. Then he thanked them and said he wasn't available. When Elena heard about it, Lily had mentioned it offhand, not fully understanding its significance. She went to Daniel directly and asked him why. "Because we live here," he said. He was sanding a windowsill, long, even strokes. "Lily has a school she likes. She has a garden. She's got friends coming over next weekend for the first time." He turned the sandpaper over to a fresh side. "That's not nothing." "It's not nothing," Elena agreed. By the following autumn, the transformation of number 42 Sycamore Lane was the kind of thing that was simply true, the way obvious things become true, gradually, then all at once. The house stood 3 stories against the autumn sky, cream-colored and solid, its porch boards oiled and level, its garden layered in the deep greens and late golds of a yard that had been planted with attention. The iron climbing frame stood at the back, forest green, clean against the October light. People slowed their cars to look, not the way they had slowed in the beginning, when the house was a wound in the neighborhood's self-image, but the way people slow when they see something beautiful. Lily played in the garden after school most days now, loud and unself-conscious, in a way she had not been when they arrived, her voice carrying across the fence to the houses on either side. She had 2 particular friends, a girl from her class named Rosie, who was good at climbing, and a boy named Marcus, who always forgot to take his shoes off. And the 3 of them moved through the garden with the disorganized authority of children who consider a space entirely their own. In the spring, Lily drew a picture at school for an assignment about home. Her teacher, who did not know the history of number 42 Sycamore Lane, looked at it for a long moment before marking it. The drawing showed a house, large and detailed for a 9-year-old, with a wraparound porch and a climbing frame in the corner of the garden. In front of the house stood 3 figures, hand in hand, a man, a girl, and a woman. The woman was slightly transparent, rendered in a yellow pencil pressed light against the page. But she was there, not a ghost, not an absence, a presence, standing in her own garden, her hand extended, connected. Below the drawing, Lily had written in careful block letters, "This is where we live. My mom showed us how to find it." On the mantelpiece of number 42, the cedar box sat beside its photograph in the oak frame. The tin box, the one from beneath the floorboard, sat open beside it, its contents arranged on the stone shelf. The faded photograph of 2 teenagers on the porch railing, the folded note in 17-year-old handwriting, and the small iron key propped against the frame. Daniel had tried every lock in the house in the days after he first moved in, working through the doors and cabinets and old strong boxes methodically. The key fit nothing. He had stopped looking. Some things didn't need to open anything. They just needed to exist, to mark the spot where a promise had been made by 2 people who didn't yet know what keeping it would cost or what it would be worth. Outside, the climbing frame stood in the October afternoon, its shadow long across the garden. Somewhere in the beds below, Sarah's roses were putting down roots for their 2nd winter, working toward the spring. The house was not the cheapest on Sycamore Lane anymore. It hadn't been for a while. But that had never been the point, and everyone on the street understood that now, including the ones who had taken the longest to get there. Number 42 was simply home, the only real one, Daniel Carter had once said, that he and his daughter had ever had. He had not been wrong.